Okay, I think we can start now. Okay. I will just mute some microphones. 1 second. Sorry if I mute you, but just for the sake of not hearing background noises. So this meeting is recorded. Welcome, everyone. I have to apologize in advance. I have here a baby. The baby is in another room, but if you can hear the baby screaming, then I'm really sorry about that, but I hope she will not scream right now. So welcome to the first paper session in the conference called Quantitative Ethnography in Learning Contexts. We have very exciting papers. We will start with Dennis Pressler, talking about STEM game design, and then we will move forward to Valentina Nachtigal to hear about the students' beliefs about natural and educational scientists. And then at the end, unfortunately, Tiffany Wright was not able to join us today due to scheduling problems.
Hello, I'm here.
But
I'm here.
Oh, you're here.
And Luis,
Okay.
Luis is here too.
Yeah, okay, because we talked to Freeze. So, Tiffany, but you're not going to present. We are going to hear your pre-recorded presentation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we will hear a presentation, and then I don't know. Are you going to stay for the Q&A session or
Luis
only
will be here.
Luis? Okay.
Luis will
And
be
so yeah. So the co-author of the Tiffany's paper, Luis, is going to stay for the Q&A session, and he's going to answer the questions about their paper on the game design. So the session is structured as followed. So you will hear 3 presentations. Each presenter will have 10 minutes. And then afterwards, we will have around 30 minutes for discussion. And please write your questions in the chat. If it's for all the presenters, or if it's only for one presenter or 2 presenters. If we run out of time or there will be not enough time to answer all the questions, we can continue the discussion in Slack, or there's a community chat afterwards if you would like to continue the discussions. Yeah, I think that's everything what I had to say. Enjoy the session, and please let's start with Denise.
Great.
The floor is yours.
I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this works. That's not helpful, is it? That's the Slack channel, isn't it? Sorry about that. Try again. This is not working. I'm so sorry. We tried this before and there we go. Sorry, it took a second. Okay, fantastic. All right, I am so excited to talk to you guys about this project that we did using ENA. We looked at how STEM game design participants discuss their project goals and their successes differently. So I know I only have 10 minutes. I'm going to talk quick. I always like to give an overview slide before I get started. So in my 10 minutes, I'm going to give you some background.
Itu harus yang besar gitu.
Oh, everything okay? Okay. All right. I'm going to give you some background about the project. As I said, we did have kids do STEM game design. And of course, this is ICQE, so we used ENA to analyze our data. And I will talk to you about the results, but not just yet. So moving right into the background section, I want to give you what we consider the problem and what we consider our proposed solution. So the problem is that we have a STEM pipeline in K-12 education going through into college and into STEM careers. And unfortunately, it leaks, right? Kids are very excited when they're young, they're excited about science, they're excited about school, and then they get more disengaged and they start to stop enjoying science. I even had my daughter, who is a middle schooler, she and her Girl Scout troop refused to do a STEM activity simply because it was STEM. Ew, STEM, they said. So the pipeline leaks. And why is that? That's because largely traditional instruction. We put these kids in a passive learning environment. We tell them science facts. we don't make science fun. And we really focus on performance goals. We've forced them to go for grades instead of going for that innate desire to simply learn something. So our proposed solution is, let's turn that traditional instruction on its head. Let's give kids some autonomy and let's have them design STEM games. We'll put the teacher into a guide on the side role and have the kids really learn the content themselves. And then by constructing the game, they will then learn that content and they will have more innate desire to do the work because they're having fun designing a game. This will hopefully put kids into a mastery orientation, and ultimately they will stick with STEM. So our methodology, as I said, ENA, let me introduce you to who the students were, what the schedule of our intervention was, and what our research questions were. So we did have two groups of students in this study. We had the students, about 80 students were involved in the STEM game design program. And also other students from their school were also involved in this particular research project. Those students just had traditional instruction. Actually, both groups had traditional instruction during school hours. The students who did the STEM game design program, it was an after-school program. So both students basically had the same instruction during the day, but the students who were the designers had a nice STEM design program that they took part in after school. So we wanted to compare these two groups of students. Basically, we had a whole school year where in the beginning of the school year, about 80 students decided to enroll in the STEM game design program. And about once a week, they would meet after school. And you would think that that we had people enroll who wanted to do this, who really wanted to do STEM game design. And certainly we found out that some of the kids in our interviews said, oh no, I just signed up because of the free food. So, you know, you always wonder when you randomly select or when you don't, who you're going to get in your sample. But not every kid was there because they were excited to design STEM games. So we had the whole school year go by, the students completed their school year. And then at the very end of the school year, we randomly selected kids, both who were STEM game designers and who were not STEM game designers. And we interviewed 7 students from the game design program and 10 from the non-game designers group. There was one interview protocol used by 2 interviewers, and every, I can't quite see this, hold on. Okay, every interview started with this quote. Think about a project that you are most proud of during your time in high school. So we had a mix of juniors and seniors in high school, and we wanted them to just broadly reflect on a project. Once they sort of decided what project they wanted to talk about, the rest of the interview pertained to that particular project. So what we found out was those 7 kids who participated in the STEM game design program, even though we didn't explicitly say, please talk about the STEM game you made, they all decided to pick that project, which in and of itself was kind of an exciting finding. Wow, okay. Moving right along, why won't my screen advance? Oh, that's not good. Okay, how are you going to see my plots if I can't advance my screen? Something happened. Oh, dear, dear, dear. I'm so sorry. I don't know why it won't move.
Maybe you can stop sharing and then find a appropriate.
Yeah, let me do that real quick. Stop share. It's not even like I have anything fancy going on here. It's just slides. Screen share again. There we go. Okay. Our research question, based on the experience grouping, whether they were a designer or a non-designer, is there a difference in how these students discussed their projects and discussed their success? So what we had were post interviews, we had transcripts. I started with open coding, came up with about 30 codes. You know, some of the codes were not very valuable, only used a couple times. So I did some memos throughout looking for connections between codes, worked with my colleagues to do a peer review process and really sort of funnel down to what are these vital codes that we really want to look at here. And we came up with 6 on the side there. You can see that the 6 codes along with our kappas. And then I looked at my research question sort of in 2 ways. I looked at project goals first. And I know, according to David Schaefer last night, we're not supposed to do this in this order, but this is how I designed my slides. So you're getting the plots first. I had my treatment, which was my STEM design kids. And then I had my control, which was my comparison. And I do see a difference here. So now why is there a difference? I like to put only a few codes into my ENA plots because it allows me to really look at the x-axis and sort of see why those groups are different. So when we do look at the plots, we see that the game designers have a strong connection between project and knowledge. We see that the non-designers have a strong connection between project and confidence. So I gave you a quick quote on the side there. The game designers might say, I learned a lot of environmental stuff. So they were really focused on what they learned. And the non-designers were just sort of talking about the project in light of how confident they were. So many people told me that it was phenomenal. Okay, so what I'm seeing there, and according to the literature that I put into this research project, basically game designers had learning goals and non-designers had performance goals. And then I'm trying to run through here now because I know I'm running out of time, right? So the success was also, looked like there would be a difference between the treatment and control. And sure enough, when you look at the x-axis, you see that game designers have a strong connection between success and persistence, while the non-designers have a strong connection between learning and success. So that was actually really interesting. I saw that in my memos from the get-go. The game designers continually talked about how hard they worked. And so here you see a game designer quote, I would work until I was satisfied with what I had accomplished that day. So this idea of persisting through to get the game to work was really robust in the qualitative data. Whereas non-designers, you can see not a very strong relationship to persistence. They barely mentioned it at all. So they would say things like, that was the first project I had ever done that I felt I could be really proud of, which was nice because these kids were in high schools that had low graduation rates. So when they talked about a project they were proud of, it was nice. They felt confident talking about that project, but there was no persistence. So what that says to me is that game designers were taking a mastery approach and the non-designers were taking a performance approach. So as I had said in the beginning, traditional instruction is unfortunately hurting our STEM pipeline because it really focuses on performance orientation and our pipeline leaks. So what we believe we found in our data here is that by putting kids into a situation where they have more autonomy over their learning and they are designing STEM games, we've now showed that they take a mastery orientation to their projects. And hopefully, if we were to do some longitudinal work here, we would see that this would help kids stick with STEM. And that is it. I know we're taking questions at the end, so I will stop sharing and we'll move on to the next presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. It was great and on time, so that's perfect. And I just want to remind you, everyone, that you can ask questions in the chat so that we have already something when we start the Q&A session. And now we are going to move to the second presentation from Valentina Nachtigal on the epistemic network analysis of students' beliefs about natural and educational sciences. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Valentina and I'm going to present results of a pilot study on students' beliefs and ideas about the work and skills of educational scientists compared to their beliefs about natural scientists. 3 years ago, a survey of 890 people in Germany revealed that the majority of the participants associates the terms research or science with STEM disciplines and medicine, but barely with the social sciences and humanities. Moreover, ample research on students' images of scientists has demonstrated that students of different age and in different countries usually imagine a scientist as a male natural scientist, usually a chemist, who works indoors, wears glasses and a lab coat, and who has facial hair. Several studies have not only focused on investigating students' images of scientists, but also on exploring students' beliefs about the work and the personal characteristics of scientists within the STEM disciplines. And this research has shown, for instance, that natural scientists are typically thought of as intellectually gifted geniuses, that they are considered as isolated, unsociable, and distant, and that students think that scientists have extremely limited interest as they solely focus on their own research. It is hypothesized that these ideas and beliefs related to science and scientists are associated with students' interest in and their attitudes towards science, and that this interaction in turn affects students' learning and their career choices. These hypothesized relations are partly supported by empirical evidence, but again only in the context of the natural sciences and STEM. That is, some studies demonstrated that students' stereotypical and often inaccurate and inadequate ideas and images of scientists, natural scientists, are linked to their interest in learning or studying STEM, which, for instance, may explain why often more male than female students decide to approach a career in STEM. So while ample research has focused on investigating students' images of and beliefs about natural scientists, empirical evidence is missing so far with regard to the following questions. What do students think about the work and characteristics of scientists within the social sciences and humanities? And how are these beliefs related to other variables, such as their interest in studying these disciplines? Investigating these questions could be important in order to foster more adequate expectations related to studying social sciences and humanities. In Germany, especially the humanities suffer from a high dropout rate of university students. And one reason for these high dropout rates is assumed to be related to students' wrong study expectations. Therefore, it is emphasized to be necessary to foster more adequate beliefs about the work and skills of scientists within the social sciences and humanities in school students already. But as mentioned before, it has not yet been investigated what kind of beliefs students have about scientists within the social sciences and humanities, and whether they indeed have inaccurate beliefs about them. And we have begun to address this research gap. In a previous study, we conducted a survey of 149 secondary school students, and our results showed that students hold rather inaccurate, imprecise, and confused beliefs about the workplaces, the skills, and the practices of scientists within the social sciences and humanities. Specifically, our results indicated that students see these scientists less as researchers, but more as practitioners, such as social workers or school and kindergarten teachers who work in pedagogical, medical, and or social areas of practice, and who especially need social skills such as empathy. We moreover conducted an epistemic network analysis and compared these beliefs between students with a high interest in studying social sciences with students who reported a rather low interest in studying social science. And the results demonstrated that the inaccurate beliefs about the work and skills of scientists within the social sciences and humanities were even stronger in students who reported a high interest in studying social sciences. That is, students with a high interest stated more often that scientists within the social sciences and humanities need social skills and work at locations of practice, while students with a low interest describe more often that scientists within the social sciences and humanities need cognitive skills and work at research locations. Against this background, students' beliefs about scientists within the social sciences and humanities, as uncovered by our previous study, seem to differ from students' beliefs about natural scientists that have been uncovered by ample previous research that I introduced before. For instance, it seems that social scientists are less seen as researchers than natural scientists. But to our knowledge, students' beliefs about social and natural scientists have not yet been empirically compared. So in the present study, we were interested in addressing this research gap. But the social sciences and humanities subsume many different disciplines. So asking students what they think about the work and skills of scientists within the social sciences and humanities might have had an impact on their confused beliefs in our previous study. So in the present study, we decided to focus on a certain discipline within the social sciences, namely the educational sciences. So we assess students' beliefs about educational scientists. We conducted a pilot study with 24 10th graders. We had to stop our data collection due to the corona pandemic. So we had initially planned to conduct a larger sample, but to collect data with a larger sample, but yeah, that's it. And in order to assess students' beliefs about the work and skills of scientists, we used two similar questionnaires, one for assessing their beliefs about educational scientists and one for assessing their beliefs about natural scientists. And students successfully worked on both questionnaires. And to avoid and control for any sequence effects, one randomly assigned half of the participants started with the questionnaire assessing their beliefs about educational scientists, and the other half started with the questionnaire referring to natural scientists. Both questionnaires included open-ended questions, and for the analysis that I'm going to present here, we focus on three open-ended questions, which are nearly similar to the questions that we used in our previous study. And the questions are: in which places do educational or natural scientists work? Which skills should educational or natural scientists have? And how do educational or natural scientists proceed at work? Or in other words, which methods do they use? Based on our previous work and on grounded analysis, we developed 7 codes to classify the student answers. And 2 raters coded 100% of the data and reached mostly satisfying agreements, but however, all disagreements were resolved by discussion. To compare students' beliefs about the work and skills of educational scientists and natural scientists, we conducted an epistemic network analysis. And for this purpose, we duplicated the samples so that one sample represented the students' beliefs about natural scientists and the other sample their beliefs about educational scientists. And as the mean epistemic network here for students' answers to the questions referring to the locations of work, skills, and methods of educational scientists shows, students associate educational scientists especially with social skills, such as empathy, helpfulness, kindness, and locations of practice, such as school, kindergarten, hospital. And they further link these 2 features to practical methods, such as conversations, group activities, talking about problems, research methods, so the observations, surveys, evaluations, and personal skills, such as creativity, patience, solution-oriented. But they make only weak connections to research locations, like universities, research institutes, and cognitive skills like intelligence or problem-solving abilities. On the contrary, the mean epistemic network for students' answers to the questions referring to the locations of work, skills, and methods of natural scientists shows that students especially associate research locations and research methods with the work of natural scientists. These 2 features are further strongly linked to either cognitive skills or personal skills. But locations of practice play a less important role in students' beliefs about natural scientists, while practical methods as well as social skills play almost no role. By subtracting both networks, these differences become even very clear. While students associate natural scientists with cognitive skills, research locations, and research methods, they associate educational scientists with social skills and locations of practice. And the ENA scatter plot further illustrates that there is a difference between students' beliefs of natural scientists on the one hand and educational scientists on the other hand, and a paired t-test revealed a statistically significant difference between their beliefs. So to conclude, in line with our previous study in which we investigated students' beliefs about scientists within the broad field of social sciences and humanities, the present study suggests that students also see educational scientists less as researchers, but more as practitioners who work as teachers, social workers, or therapists in educational, socio-pedagogical, or medical areas. And for this work, educational scientists, at least according to students' imagination, especially need social skills such as empathy. And almost diametrical to this view, natural scientists are perceived as researchers who work at research locations, apply research methods, and need cognitive skills for their work. And the results of our present and our previous study indicate that there is a need to foster students' acquisition of actual knowledge about the workplaces, skills, and practices of scientists within the social sciences and humanities. And one could further assume that such inaccurate beliefs about scientists within the social sciences and humanities are one of the reasons why people, at least in Germany, do rather not associate the social sciences and humanities with the terms science or research. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Valentina. It was a great presentation. And now we are going to move forward to the presentation of Tiffany and Luis. Luis, are you going to play the video? So the presentation is on examining patterns of a long-term collaboration in virtual STEM makerspace.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation of our paper, Getting There Together, Examining Patterns of a Long-Term Collaboration in a Virtual STEM Makerspace. My name is Tiffany Wright. I'm joining you all, from the US. And my colleague, Luis Oliveira, is joining us from Brazil. We will be presenting today as we represent Pepperdine University. And we are working together along with our colleagues on a grant by the name of IC4, which stands for International Community for Collaborative Content Creation. The IC4 project serves students ages 12 through 17 in various countries across the globe, which you can read here on our slide. We are a virtual STEM makerspace program. We will get into more detail of how our virtual STEM makerspace worked for the participants in this particular study. And we also want to highlight that we have video conference calls with students via Zoom, which we'll also get into more during the presentation. So in terms of our conceptual framework, we did utilize the community of inquiry. We just started off our paper just describing how in this traditional community of inquiry, there's a teacher, and then there's peers, and there's the social aspect to learning. But we wanted to look at how the role of the quote teacher or facilitator in our work, how that shifted a bit. The students were not just peers, but also they took on more of that traditional teacher role. And we also want to look at the online collaborative learning theory and how students move more from generating ideas to working together to come to this convergence of ideas. We'll talk more in the discussion section about how that played out in our study. So in our study, we're looking at how the facilitator's presence influences students' discourse patterns over time, and how social and cognitive patterns shift for learners through the long-term collaboration. We did look at 4 meetups. You can see the months here, the span of that. We also utilized ENA to examine the construct connections made in discourse patterns. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Luis, to discuss methodology and results.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tiffany. So firstly, we would like to take you guys through the code book that we developed. The first code that we used was content focused. Then we had curiosity, feedback, information sharing, participatory teaching, and social disposition. So to continue on with the methodology for this study, we used the
Luis,
participant as the unit of analysis.
I don't think
Each meetup constituted a conversation to which the connections were very limited. We decided to use a moving stanza window of 7 to keep the analysis very accurate and concise. Next slide. Great. So now we'll be sharing with you the results section. So here's a table that depicts the frequency and percentage of total utterances by role in each of the 4 meetups. So in the first meetup in November 2018, we see a very low participation from the students, as we can see by their number of utterances at 107, only 18% of the total utterances, and a very high percentage from the facilitators and the observers. We see a slight increase of the student utterances in January of 2019 at 40%, and a slight decrease from the observers. In March and May, we see a very radical and positive shift regarding the student utterances. We see an increase to 61% in March, and a decrease of the facilitator and observer utterances to 25% and 14% respectively. And then in May, we see also a very high percentage of utterances coming from the students at 57%, and a low percentage of the utterances coming from facilitators and observers. So here we have our ENA models. So on the left, we have the first meeting in November 2018. So immediately we see very strong connections with content focus and info sharing, and social disposition and content focus. And then in January of 2019, the second meetup, we still see very strong connection between social disposition and content focus. However, we see a much more stronger connection with curiosity and content focus. So now March of 2019 is where we start to see a very radical shift again in the pattern. We see strong connections with curiosity and content focused, and also now we see a very strong connection with participatory teaching and content focused. And May of 2019 is very similar. We see strong connection between participatory teaching, content focused, curiosity, content focused, and cooperation, content focused, which is drastically different from the first two meetups. And here we see the group means and confidence intervals for each of the 4 meetups. So at the bottom left, we have the first one in November, and then we have January 2019 slightly up and to the right, and then the final 2 meetups, March and May, we see all the way up and to the right. So in general, we see an upwards and rightward shift, which we will explain in the discussion section.
Thank you, Luis. So Luis did a great job of setting us up for how the results played out. And I just want to expand upon that in terms of our framework, the online collaborative learning theory, and how the ENA models translate into that concept. So we're looking at, on the x-axis, going from social orientation to task orientation. And for the moment, I'll focus on the graphic on the left-hand side of the screen. We'll move over to the right-hand side graphic in a second. And we're looking, again, going back to the left side, we're looking at, on the y-axis, how divergent thinking evolves into convergent thinking for these students. So I'll go ahead and start with this idea of info sharing. If you look at the divergent thinking at the bottom along the y-axis, so as you see, students started generating ideas in the first month of the project as to what they wanted to do for the project. Again, led by a facilitator who was more so the guide and carrying things along and giving them some of the initial ideas or helping them see how they could work together for this project. But as we go up the y-axis, we're seeing on the right-hand side, participatory teaching. So the students were no longer coming up with just general ideas or relying on the facilitator. They were actually teaching each other as they went along the project and learned and had knowledge that they could apply, but also come together to say, how do we want this to carry out in our specific project in the makerspace? Back to the x-axis, we're seeing this shift from social orientation to task, specifically looking at the construct of cooperation, for example. So the students were more so taking ownership of the task, not just while they were in those specific meetups, but also week to week, they were taking on tasks and doing tasks outside of the global meetups to see how they could come to the next meetup ready to explain what they came up with. There was a lot of problem solving going on in between the meetups. So cooperation certainly evolved over time as their discourse evolved. Going over to the right-hand graphic, you're seeing with the arrows showing from the months of 2018, November, the first meetup, to 2019, ending in May, how their thinking evolved over time. So just to brief with the discussion, this increase in student participation, again, they're taking more ownership and they're not just merely there as learners absorbing the knowledge, but they're producing the knowledge. There's also a shift in their discourse, again, just a more evolved way of them thinking and taking ownership of the material. which also leads to the divergent to convergent thinking and also the shifts in the orientation. So we know this was a little brief just given the time frame that we have. We do want to invite you to email us with any questions that you may have. You can email either of us. Also for the Q&A, we'll be able to answer any specific questions you may have about our paper. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So now we are going to get into the discussion part. So I don't see any questions in chat yet, so feel free to write them. If you just want to unmute and ask any questions, then you can also do it. And until it happens, then I will just ask some questions. So I have a question to each presenter, but I will start with Luis, maybe because his presentation was last. And you mentioned that you used 7 lines of the stanza window. Could you explain how did you arrive at 7 and not 4 or any other number?
Yeah, so for deciding the moving stanza window of 7, we just found that the conversations were very concise and they related to each other in like in a very fast level. So like a comment or a thought that a student shared would only pertain to a few lines above. It wouldn't relate to anything that was said like 10 or 15 lines earlier. It would only relate to like the previous few utterances from the other students. So that's why we decided to choose a very concise stanza window of 7.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question from Jennifer to Denise, and she's wondering about the nature of the game design and other project, and also wondering if you have any metrics regarding the student feelings about science, such as self-efficacy at the end of the intervention.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack in there. Let me start with, I'm wondering about the nature of the game design and other projects. Right, so yes, as I said, the 7 students we interviewed who were participating in the game design project all talked about their game design project, but the other students talked about a variety of things. There were history projects that had a very personal component that kids talked about. There were science projects that they particularly liked. There were even art projects that were very hands-on that got the kids really excited. So those kids in the comparison group definitely talked about a variety of projects, including a few science projects. But all the kids in the game design group talked about their game design project. So hopefully that answered the first part of the question. And then oh my gosh, other metrics. This particular project collected a lot of data. I could look at probably a measure of self-efficacy. I do believe we collected that, and that would be really interesting to pull into this analysis. I think you're right there. So yeah, we did look at things like self-efficacy, science interest. There may have even been a motivation measure in there. I just kept this really pure with qualitative interview data, didn't really pull in any of the survey data or the other instruments that we collected. But you're onto something there. I think I like that. Maybe that's my next analysis.
Okay.
I think there's a question for us regarding how we counted the utterances for the meetups. So for our meetings that we had with the students, they were all recorded and transcribed by a program we use called Trint. So we take the meetings and we put it into this program that virtually and automatically takes all of what was said and puts it into words. And afterwards, we converted that information to Excel, and then we used Excel simply to go back and count all of the utterances by each of the students. And the program does it pretty much all automatically. So we have statistics of how many times each student spoke, and we could sum up all of the students and see how many times they all spoke throughout each respective meetup. And that's how we compiled the table with the frequencies and the percentages of each utterance.
Okay, thank you, Luis. So there's a question from Yuan Ru, a general question, and any presenter can have their input. Is there anything surprising or that you didn't expect to see in your ENA results? is there any qualitative example in your data that can explain why that's surprising? So just unmute and go ahead.
This doesn't perfectly jive with the question, but there was something very surprising in my analysis. When I dove in, I really thought I'd find differences between females and males, given STEM game design. I thought that the girls and the boys would yield different data, but when I analyzed by gender, there wasn't any difference. So that was surprising to me. And so I didn't report on that. So then it was really the difference between the kids in the control versus the comparison, having the difference in performance versus mastery orientation that ended up being the real analysis.
Okay, there seems to be another question for us. So,
Luis, wait a second. Would you like to say something about the previous question about the surprising results due to the ENA analysis? Or any
yeah, actually,
yeah,
yeah, of course, yeah, and I can tie it in
yeah.
to the next question too, because it actually flows quite well. For the ENA, yeah, we were kind of surprised how there was a really radical shift in the students' comfort level, you know, from being kind of more observers and very passive to taking on a very active and more of a facilitator role. We were really surprised how that happened over the course of the 4 months, and that reflected quite accurately in the ENA models that we saw. And to answer Marcia's question, so the overall project that the students were working on regarded programming using Arduino. So each of the two sites had their own physical Arduino project that they were working on, and that's how they collaborated with one another. So that was kind of like the project was what tied the students in like a cognitive sense. So that's what really kept them engaged. So we were really happy to see how from the first two meetups, it was a very social scenario, how there was, you know, that divergent thinking, not very focused. Everyone was just kind of throwing their own ideas around. And then for the last two meetups, we were really happy to see how it was very extremely convergent. Like the students were very laser focused, just because of the nature of the task as well. It was programming involving numbers and involving a lot of, you know, a lot of tasks. So that's like the shift that we were really happy to see, and it really surprised us how quickly the students, you know, became comfortable with one another and took on a more of like a leader and facilitator role in trying to actively explain to the other students how to do the project essentially.
Thank you. Valentina, would you like to add something to the qualitative example in your data?
Yeah, I don't have any qualitative example, but I think we were quite surprised that the differences between the beliefs were so clear. So we expected them to be different, but that they really didn't associate the natural scientists with not with social skills, and the educational sciences really not with cognitive skills. That was quite surprising that it was so clear, and it's quite a little bit sad, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone want to jump in and unmute? Then that's your chance now. And meanwhile, I can ask Valentina another question that I have. So I noticed in your coding scheme, it's quite interesting because you have your codes, but next to the codes you have question 1, question 2, question 3. And I was just wondering if it meant that you were using the specific codes only when you were coding the answers to the specific questions, or you used the whole scheme. Like, could you elaborate on that? I found it quite interesting.
No, they really refer to the specific questions, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense in this data set. We plan to conduct interviews in the future studies, because this was, I think, quite a limitation of this study and our previous study, that we used the open questions and that that we used questionnaires, because the students tend to give very brief answers. So in our future studies, we want to conduct interviews and hope that we can get a better understanding and a deeper understanding of their beliefs. Yeah. So yeah, they wouldn't fit to the other questions. So the codes, for instance, research locations or locations of practice wouldn't fit to the answers to questions that refer to the methods that they use.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's another question for you. Why do you think students have that beliefs? And for example, that education is not related to cognitive science? This is the question from Marcia.
You mean why students do not associate educational scientists with cognitive skills, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think one reason is the presentation of scientists in media. I think that's one big reason, because people think that only that only people who work in a laboratory with a white coat do science and not people like us. I think that's one thing. And we always make this experience at our university with our students who enroll in educational sciences studies. They are really surprised about the statistics courses. They really do not expect these courses or these contents in the study. So I don't know why. I think school is one reason, media, and we really have to do something there. Because they think that we are just sitting around and we want to help people. We need to be kind and empathetic, and that's all what we do. And we do not do any research, or we do not need intelligence or something like that. And I think we have to do something there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answer. I have also another question to Denise, and feel free also to add your questions in the chat. So you said that you had 32 codes at the beginning, and then it went down to 6 codes. And you mentioned a bit about the process, but could you elaborate more? Like, did you really just eliminate the codes that were where there were not enough connections between them, or were there also other sources for your decisions to eliminate certain codes?
Yeah. Okay. So there were 17 interviews. Each interview was approximately 10 minutes long. So it was a robust, rich data set. And it was a semi-structured protocol. So kids did sort of wander off topic a little bit, and their interviewer would have to rope them back into the protocol. So it yielded a lot of codes, right? Like creativity was a code. Or creative thinking, something like that. And it's like that didn't really connect to anything, like you were saying. So while some kid might have been talking about an art project and talking a lot about the creative thinking going into it, no one else talked about that. So then that wasn't going to help me compare across kids. So yeah, some codes weren't used a lot, some codes didn't connect to a lot. And I alluded to this in my presentation. I like to simplify my models and just really hone in on a couple codes so that I can describe what's going on along the axes. So I really wanted to just narrow it down to like the essential, most vital codes and really be able to tell a good, solid story. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I actually had
Yes,
it reminded
please,
me of a
Cody.
question it reminded me of a question I
Go
had
ahead.
for Denise. So you mentioned you brought it down to 6 codes, and then the 2 models that you were showing are actually only using 3 in each case. I was curious if you tried creating a model. So it was trying to remember what it was now, but I was curious if you tried running models where you had all 6 codes present, and then what that looked like for you and how you got to the decision to have 3 individual. I know you said you were narrowing it down, but I was curious if you tried looking at the model with all 6 of them in the space where like you had designers and non-designers still.
Right. I find when I put too many codes into the model, I'm seeing connections between things that the connection doesn't make sense in a way. I'm trying to give I'm trying to think of an example, but like I know if you use RENA, you can tell it, don't look for this connection because this connection doesn't make sense, right? So unfortunately, I'm not super savvy with RENA. I use the web tool, so I haven't figured out how to drop out certain connections, but I would love to get to that point so that, yeah, maybe I could include a couple more codes. Did I put all 6 in to the model? I don't think I did. Because I wanted to sort of parse out those 2 research questions, really talking about project goals and talking about success. Yeah, I just keep it simple.
Sure. No, I was just curious because it creates 2 different spaces. Like when you look at the one with 3 codes, it's one space, and then you look at the other one, it's a different space. And so I was just curious to see if you had done it that way. But it does bring up an interesting piece of another part of the WebENA that has a feature that's missing in terms of being able to mask those codes if there's a particular connection that may or may not make sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions? Please, you can
I have
also
another
unmute
one.
yourself. Oh, then go ahead.
For Valentina, I was curious, you mentioned right before you jumped to the model that you duplicated your units from 24 to 48. And I was trying to follow what that actually meant in terms of how what that translated to from your actual data from the responses to what that created for your units that you were looking at in your model. Like, so if the utterances that were coded were like were all the codes duplicated with them, or did, like, I was just curious if you could explain that a little bit more.
So it was like a within subjects design, if you want to call it like this. So I used the answers for to the questions relating to the educational scientist questions, and then the answers with regard to the natural scientists, you know. So I don't know how to do it otherwise. In order to compare them, you know, because we use these 2 questionnaires in our sample with 24 students. And I wanted to compare their beliefs between educational scientists and natural scientists. So I had to do it like this, don't I?
I think so. So then you're saying, so you had the responses from, and they had the coded response. Like, so you coded all the responses, and then you duplicated all of the coded responses for each unit.
No, we had 2 data sets.
2 data
We had
sets,
one
okay.
data set with the student answers to the questions that related to the work and the skills of educational scientists, and then we had a data set with their answers to the questions about natural scientists, and then we merged it, and then it was like within subject design, and we conducted a paired t-test, so a dependent t-test. Yeah.
Okay. The merged data set makes that makes more sense to me. I get that.
Yeah, we merged it. Okay. So we used 2 coding schemes, but they were similar.
Okay.
The examples for the codes differ, of course, but we use the same codes for both data sets.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other question? It's your last chance. Okay, so you can still think about the question. I will just tell you what happens afterwards. So after this session, there is a community chat session, which takes half an hour. And there you are going to have 2 breakout rooms. One of them is education interest group. So if you're interested in education, you can just jump in and connect with other people who are also interested in that. There's also going to be an ICQE Resource Committee meet and greet where I'm going to be, where we are going to talk about our committee and what we are doing. So if you're interested in that, then you can also jump in and meet us. And I assume, Song, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the community chat also means that you can just chat, right?
Yes, we will have some breakout rooms for folks to jump in to have smaller discussions.
Yeah, so that's also possible. So you can take use of that right now or during the whole conference. So if there are no other questions, then I really wanted to thank you all for joining. I want to thank all the presenters and all the other participants and for all the questions. It was a great session, and now you have 5 minutes to take some water or make a coffee. And then I hope we see each other in the next session and then also later in the conference. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.